Charles Ho Wang Mak, PhD candidate in international law at the University of Glasgow. And you've attended the University of Sussex, the Chinese University of Hong Kong in international economic law, City University of Hong Kong, and you're a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. And your presentation is going to focus on psychology and the question of whether it ought to be included in the syllabus of international law modules. And so it's over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Shall I? So good morning, good afternoon, and evening, wherever you are around the world. Thank you for registering for my presentation. I'm very excited to present some of my work in progress on cultivating psychology in international legal education today. So thank you very much for everyone to joining me today. Unlike so I'm going to share my screen first. So, unlike other disciplines, the study of law purports to base solely on reasoned analysis, devoid of ideological bias and unconscious influences, inspired by the psychology of international law and introduction, written by Professor Anne van Arkind and Professor Truman-Brood. Cognitive research and behavioral economics have been overlooked by public international law scholarship for years. This is pity since they can uncover the unconscious influences on legal rules that so often go unobserved. International legal education is important to train foreign policymakers. Throughout the years, international political psychology and the applications of behavioral economics are becoming more important in the discipline of international law. Therefore, psychology is one of the significant disciplines of international law and ought to be included in the syllabus for international law subjects. No doubt, psychology in international law will generate many insights that have the potential to enrich our understanding of international law. Currently, psychology is not included in the syllabus of international law modules in vast majority of law schools. In the following, I will critically analyze the importance of psychology as a subject matter in international legal education. So the first part will provide an overview of the notions of psychology in the context of international law. Moving on to the overview of psychology in the international law, I will focus in particular on the importance of psychology as a subject matter in the context of international law. Building on the analysis, I will discuss whether psychology should be included in the syllabus for international law subjects. So, as identified by Andreas Kabadis, the plethora of applications of psychology to law can be differentiated in terms of what has been defined as psychology in law, psychology and law, and psychology of law. According to Blackburn, psychology in law refers to specific applications of psychology within law, such as reliability of eyewitness testimony, mental state of defendant, and parent suitability for child custody in a divorce case. Psychology in law has been one of the most common differentiations and the source of much of the uneasiness of legal psychology. And psychology of law is used by Blackburn to denote, for example, psycholegal research into offenders, lawyers, magistrates, judges, and jurors. So finally, psychology of law is used to refer to psychological research into such issues as to why people obey or disobey certain laws, moral development, and public perceptions and attitudes towards various penal sanctions. And the most relevant plethora of application of psychology is the law that's applicable to international legal education is psychology of law, where it can be used to explore issues as to the reasons why states agree to ratify certain international laws as well as the public perceptions. As noted by Professor Anne van Arkind and Professor Truman-Brood's work, psychological realities have been underappreciated, even though the experiments yet more factors to consider, more perhaps better tools in the toolbox that may enable sustained cooperation in the international realm. And they have also pointed out that there are some strongly intercalated methodological challenges in the behavioral research agenda, like the choice of research questions and methods, which is relevant units of analysis. So, psychology is a scientific study of human behaviors and minds. Behind every political decision-making process and actions, there are sophisticated psychological mechanisms. However, those psychological mechanisms are overlooked constantly by mainstream international relations and international law scholarships. International law and international law, sorry, international and international relations are closely associated. International law is a set of rules, norms, and standards that are generally accepted in relations between nations, which is significant in the policy-making process and will guide the behaviors of countries. As a set of studies examining the driving force behind the behavior of states, i.e. both international cooperation and conflict, international relations plays an important role in shaping the context of international law. Historically, there are many examples of international legislations in the United Nations that could not enter into force because of not enough member states of the United Nations were willing to ratify it. For example, the Vienna Convention on Secession of States in respect of state property, archive, and that of 1983 has not yet entered into force because of the insufficient number of ratifications since its lack of signatories by member states of the United Nations. Therefore, it is crucial to understand more about international relations for a better understanding of the international lawmaking process. And further, a basic understanding of psychology, in particular, political psychology, is essential for students to understand the underlying principles of international relations and international law. And this is because political psychology is the study of psychological processes that shape political behavior and of the process by which political events influence the psychological reactions of individuals and groups. And because political psychology is such an expansive field, even within the narrower disciplines of international relations, it is difficult to find a definite statements that cover everything. And Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky are the key pioneers in constructing, on the basis of clinical experiments, a variety of decision-making models that international relations scholars have used. And besides, the study of international law involved an in-depth analysis of applicable legal framework in conflicts between states. And however, international law scholarship often focuses on legal framework itself and neglects the legislative intent of the law. Since the search for legislative intent is crucial for statutory interpretations, and it ought to be focused on as well. Additionally, judges and councils often use legislative history in the interpretation of statutes, and a comprehensive understanding of legislative intent requires not just the use of legislative history, but the international relations and political psychology theory as well. And this is because the legislative intent of international law often driven by political reasoning that could be analyzed from a political psychological perspective. And so along with the combined study, along from the combined studies of other social sciences, such as international relations and the law, psychology and the law have been expanding markedly over the last few decades, and law schools often offer courses in both law and international relations at the same time. Yet, psychology, in particular, political psychology of international relations, is not included in the syllabus of international law modules in vast majority of law schools. And since international law is significant in the political policy-making process, which would guide countries' behaviors, international legal education is crucial to train foreign policymakers. and a successful learning process for law students to understand the underlying principles of international law consists not just the law itself, but the international relations and the political psychology. And it is worthwhile for law schools to consider teaching about psychology, in particular the political psychology, in their international law modules. And most of the scholars in international law do not have a solid education background in psychology. And the problem is that many students, academics, and practitioners of international law, including myself, take no course of psychology at all. And in fact, psychology should be a fundamental requirement for completion of any international modules relating to the diplomacy and international politics. In order to include psychology in the syllabus for international law subjects, more research in this field is required, including more tailor-made experiments, and there are still some knowledge gaps for international law experts lies to the realm of psychology. And there is a strong need for psychology requirements for all international law, strategic studies, public diplomacy, and so forth. But it seems to go largely overlooked. Without question, psychology in international law will generate many insights that have the potential to enrich our understanding of international law. If psychology were one of the mandatory requirements for completion of an international law modules, law school shall explain the psychology theories in an easy to understand way. Of course, students cannot stay in the school forever, and there are many courses that can be taken after schools. Legal industries require continuous learning. Psychology are not fluffy and useless subjects that international law syllabus should only take an optional electives simply to meet institutional prerequisites for graduation. Psychology is a serious subject that shall give a more central role on the international legal education. A better understanding of psychology will enhance students' knowledge in international law. International lawyers are global citizens, which is a highly influential citizen. Law schools should train the international lawyers influence events globally. And it is crucial importance for law schools to design an education that produce a more complex and deliberative type of human being than human being who just practice law. And thank you very much for the organizing this event.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And again, if anyone has questions, then please place them on the chat bar. Can I just begin by asking you a couple of questions? Firstly, I appreciate that you're an international lawyer, but would you be in favour of psychology being introduced as a topic, a core subject, or an optional subject in any form of legal education, international or otherwise?
Yeah, definitely. I think psychology should be a compulsory mandatory subject for the law schools. Every law student should study psychology, not just international law students, but other law students as well. Since psychology, every law student, every lawyer should learn some basic understanding of psychology to be able to be a better lawyer.
And when you speak of international law and the relationship with psychology, I mean, in sort of bringing it back to basics, you're talking about law students receiving some sort of training into the psychology of international relations, political policy, international political philosophy, and so on. But leaders, politicians, governments change. So, I mean, psychology principally relates to the individual, doesn't it? So how could there be any form of consistent compelling guidance as to the psychology of a particular country's international policy or political philosophy when it's a moving feast?
I think political psychology is not a study for a particular government. Rather, it is a psychology subject that study the whole regime, not just that particular term of government, I suppose.
But when you say regime, I mean, training in psychology for law students would it be directed at the culture of a given nation or the political philosophy of the government of the time, or what?
I think it will be more psychological, more social science, in the way of teaching students how to understand the underlying principle of international law by understanding the legislative intent of the policymakers.
All right, well, there's a question from Simon Bruman, which is as follows. Do you think law lecturers need training in relation to quantitative techniques? They tend to predominate in psychology.
Yeah, I do. I think quantitative techniques are crucial for every discipline, not just law, but every discipline in social science. And law as one of the subjects in social science. And for those law lecturers, they should learn more about both, not just quantitative, but also qualitative methodology as well.
All right, thank you for that. And then further question from Sharon Wang is as follows. To what extent is your argument specific to international law, or is this a specific example of a claim about the potential value of the study of psychology in all legal education? We've briefly touched on that, but it's a good question because it really goes to the gravamen of what you're proposing. So what do you have to say about Sharon's question?
I believe psychology is not just important for international lawyers. Rather, psychology as a subject matter is crucial for every law students, every lawyers. For example, in particular for those dispute resolution lawyers, they should learn about psychology. For example, for mediators, in order to practice as a good mediators, they should learn how to rectify the feelings of the parties. And psychology plays an important role at that. And if law students they learn more about psychology, and their skills in mediating, in communications will be enhanced.
Right, thank you. And then there's a question from former Dean of CUHK, Professor Chris Gain, which is as follows. Are there domestic law subjects that you have seen that include psychology successfully that have reformed your research?
Not at the moment. I think, as I recall, there is not a particular domestic law subjects will include psychology. But I think if we are going to include psychology as one of the subject matter for international law, we can take international relations and political psychology as a reference when we're developing for psychology and law.
Just before I come to the next question, very briefly, what is it that triggered your interest in psychology becoming an aspect of legal education in international law?
My idea was inspired by an article written by Professor Anne van Arkens and Tuma Brood, which is called The Psychology of International Law, an Introduction.
Right. Okay, there are quite a few questions, so we need to get through them the time we have available. Okay. The chat bar says question from Bree Williams, but there is in fact no question, so I don't know whether that's coming. The next question is from Julie. There is a psychology element which is considered in some business courses which are taught in the UK. I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. And if it's taught in some business courses, I certainly think it should be given consideration in criminal law courses, but that's another matter. And then from Say Man Tai, a two-part question. Firstly, do you perceive psychology and psychometric assessment as taking precedence over politics, international relations jurisprudence, and legal research, or not? Did you get that question?
Can you repeat once again? Sorry.
Yeah. Do you perceive psychology and psychometric assessment as taking precedence over politics and international relations, jurisprudence, and legal research or not?
I think personally, psychology is one, not the only um, psycho only elements to for. I think learning psychology is the better understanding of psychology will enhance your understanding of the underlying principle of the jurisprudence, like how to, in particular, for the policy making process. And you can learn more about the legislative intention of the lawmakers.
Right. And the second part of the questions is, from your experience, what are the similarities and differences between civil and common law students in terms of legal psychology? Are you able to comment on that?
Since I do not have much knowledge in civil law system, so I don't think I have a good position in comment to these questions. I will need to study more.
Fine. And there's a question from our first speaker today, Mr. Shivang Rawat, which is as follows. Can you please give an instance where psychology was the reason for development of international law? That's a very good question from a criminal lawyer to an international lawyer. Good cross-examination from Mr. Rawat. So shall I repeat the question or do you have it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you, sorry, it was me probably distracting by my little speech. Can you please give an instance where psychology was the reason for development of international law? Are you able to help about that?
So as case law by international court are also part of the sources for international law. And psychology, in particular political psychology of nations, plays a crucial role in forming a case.
Right.
As mentioned, psychology has three phases like psychology of law, psychology in law, and psychology and law. And psychology in law refers to a specific application of psychology within law, such as the reliability of eyewitnesses' testimony. And I think in international law cases, they have witnesses, right? And they are quite, and political force with the political psychology is a kind of driven force for forming a case. So I think that, it's kind of development for driven by psychology, I think.
Right. Have you actually studied psychology yourself, or you've obviously got a profound interest in the topic?
Yeah, I just have a profound interest in psychology, but I haven't studied any formal psychology modules in my life. Yeah.
Right. That's excellent. Well, the angle that you've come up with is really fascinating, and psychology is obviously something that's capable of influencing all fields of law. And my subject, Mr. Rawat's criminal law, definitely springs to mind. We have no psychological training at all in what is probably the most human-related legal field on the planet. So it's a really interesting angle.